Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted by grandtheftworld.com. It's January 2nd, 2022. This is episode 61. It's titled Fauci Flu 2022. Tonight, we're going to hear from many people. It's a deep show card. It's going to be a very densely packed past week of news that we're going to try to unpack and provide context for you. One of the things we're going to feature tonight is Jay Dyer and Jason Bermas had a live stream earlier today talking about transhumanism, cybernetics, and the not-for-profit foundations and groups like the Rand Corporation and their influence in shaping of your daily lives and your future.
It's a sales job. How do we sell it to people?
So Rand will recruit a lot of people out of PhD programs to come work at Rand. And so I think it says publicly, they say they have almost 2,000 employees across the world. So in regard to them, the way that these kinds of things work, as you know, from like the military, a lot of stuff is compartmentalized. And for those that go to grad school, I went to grad school, I didn't get a PhD, but I went to grad school. The more grad school you do, the more focused and compartmentalized and niche your study is. So people that get PhDs in topics that would be relevant to Rand will spend many years studying math, studying engineering, and they'll be separate from people over there studying social engineering, right? So people overly specialize, and then they don't make cross-discipline connections. So people who know a lot about math and engineering probably don't know who Francis Galton is, right? They don't know who Huxley is. I mean, they've heard of Aldous Huxley, but they don't know about, Cold Springs Harbor and this kind of stuff. They don't know about the history of dysgenics per se. So that's how this functions, this giant machine, which does have an agenda at the top, but people recruited into it because they're so compartmentalized and they've had their nose in tons of books on one tiny minute subject. I mean, I was just talking to a guy who has a master's in engineering, and he was talking about people that go and get PhDs in engineering, and he was talking about how insanely just minutia they get into. Like, you get a PhD in engineering on like the lubricant for some oil and how to best tweak that oil in one screw. And you write a PhD thesis on this for many years, right? I mean, it's just crazy. So if you're doing that, and I can say from being in academia and being around that world for many years, people in one discipline, they don't know anything that's going on in the building down the road. So they don't know psyops. They don't know what's going on with, the history of dysgenics. They don't know the history of that kind of stuff. So that's how it works in terms of ignorance and compartmentalization. Everybody knows this too with the Manhattan Project, right? It operated that way. People building these things, they'd be building one little part and they had no idea what it went to. Again, remember one idea that Rand talked about a long time ago that the Pentagon eventually adopted was full spectrum dominance. That's a Rand idea. So with full spectrum dominance comes that model of Internet of Things, everything being tracked and traced, everything being modeled in supercomputers where real-time recording and tracking of everything going on in the real world over in a sim model, probably somewhere underground under the Pentagon. I don't know where it is, but that's what they cook up. That's what they want. So I would be afraid of a quicker kind of thing than an 8-year incremental model.
There's also Dr. Robert Malone has made the rounds this past week, making a lot of different statements that have been controversial in the news sphere. He got deleted from Twitter. He made his appearance the next day on the Joe Rogan podcast. And from there, minds are being blown all over the world, listening to the creator of mRNA say a whole bunch of things that people didn't think they'd ever hear him say.
So what was it like to reach that mark of getting interviewed by Joe Rogan? What was that like?
Rogan is totally chill. He's just there in the moment, relaxed, a fantastic interviewer. And what surprised me, I was asked on another one last night, what surprised you most about Rogan? He is completely up on all the information, and yet it's totally low-key.
I've noticed that just over the past week, maybe two, it seems like the administration and the CDC some of them are walking things back. So you have Biden saying, no, it's up to the states. Even though
that was classic.
Even though I'm still gonna pursue federal mandates, but it's up to the states. Then you have,
we can't solve this problem. The states have to.
Right.
Oh, by the way, we're going to restrict your availability of monoclonal antibodies.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
What?
like to speak. But I mean, just the fact that he walked that back a little bit or said that, and then you had the CDC, a spokesperson saying, okay, no, cloth masks don't work. And then you also had, there's so much that I had to write.
Shortening the quarantine time, that's another one.
That's what I felt like there was so many that I was like trying to write them down. Oh, and then Rochelle Walensky saying, admitting PCR tests might continue
the PCR story is a huge scandal. What that shows, you were talking about the data integrity. What that means is that the incidence rate of COVID disease and death, because what they said was anybody that dies in the hospital, anybody that dies that can be shown to be SARS-CoV-2 positive by a false PCR test, right? That was the
counts as a death.
Counts as a death from COVID. What that means is the bottom number in the ratio for anything, the incidence of death, all this huge scare that is the basis for all the fear porn. You're all going to die, right? That's justified the emergency use authorizations and everything else. This statement that's about to expire in mid-January that is underlying all this emergency declaration. That's all built, it's a house of cards. And the CDC is now starting to come clean about that. They're not talking about the implications. They're just saying, oh, well, the PCR assay was bunk and we shouldn't have used it. Well, thank you. But, now, why don't you fix all the other stuff that is the consequence of your bad judgment?
And then last but not least, we've got Jimmy Dore. He's going to be, he takes a couple shots at my favorite Rhodes Scholar, Rachel Maddow. And she said some things recently that were not true with relation to the plague that's ongoing out there. And it takes a comedian to call her out and fact check and hold her feet to the fire.
If you're getting your information about COVID and the vaccines from the establishment news, you're being lied to. And you're being lied to at the top of their lungs, constantly 24/7, with very earnest looking people who you would never think would lie to you. Like, how about Rachel Maddow? Come on. She wouldn't lie. She's a nerd. Well, watch her lie nonstop about COVID.
Means that instead of the vaccine being able, instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person to person, spreading and spreading, sickening some of them, but not all of them. And the ones that it doesn't sicken don't know they have it. And then they give it to even more people because they didn't recognize they were, right? Instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person, potentially mutating and becoming more virulent and drug resistant along the way. Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person.
That's not true. That was never true. That's not true. That was never true. This is from the end of March, almost April of this year, 2021. She's saying this. That's a lie. That's medical misinformation. And if this video of her saying this is up on YouTube, which it might be, they'll never take it down. But this is straight up 100% medical misinformation. And this is why people hate the unvaccinated, because they listen to a lying propagandist like Rachel Maddow tell them the people who aren't vaccinated are the ones not stopping COVID. This is all garbage.
A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus. The virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else.
That is a lie. That is false. That is medical misinformation brought to you by Pfizer. She gets $30,000 a day to lie for Pfizer and the military-industrial complex, and she's doing it. She's lying to you right now.
It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people.
Not true.
That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this.
That is not what that means. Why is it I knew that in my garage? But you don't know it with your $30,000 a day and your tens of millions of dollars in help, in staff? How many producers do you think she has? 20? How many interns that work there? 50? How many people work at that show? 100? If you get the whole population vaccinated, we're still going to have COVID. You get the whole Gibraltar, 100% vaccinated. They just canceled Christmas. Look what happened to Iceland. Look what happened to Singapore. Look what happened to South Korea. Look what happened in Israel. So that is why. So it's this kind of information that my friends have, that's why they're angry at the unvaccinated, because they think like this, which is a lie. That's not science, what she's saying. That's propaganda. It's a lie. The COVID virus is never going away. Ever. Ever. And we're all likely to get it. If you live long enough, you're likely to get it. She's lying. None of that is true. And that's why people are hating on their neighbors instead of hating on the establishment who won't give you health care in the middle of what they call a deadly pandemic. They won't even give you health care, but they will give you a jab. They'll give you endless jabs at the cost of billions and billions of dollars to the government, but they won't give you health care.
And those clips will be played in their entirety later on in this episode. We're going to kick it off first, though, with Luke Rudowski from wearechange.org, and the bestpoliticaltshirts.com. Let's go to Luke for the kickoff.
In accordance with Decree 2021-096, adopted under the Public Health Act, you are ordered between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. to be at your residence or the ground of that residence. Refusal to obey either of these orders makes you liable to a fine ranging from $1,000 to $6,000.
Another year, another martial law by decree in a Western country. Welcome back.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.